Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that's going on in the world right now, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a man named Grant Amato. And I use the term man loosely, a human being named Grant Amato, who is a family annihilator who murdered his parents and his brother over a woman he never even met. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. They're all Bratterstein, but no pressure. But before we get into the whole terrible story, I need to say a thank you for today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. I'm so stoked that Skillshare is sponsoring another video of mine because I've been loving Skillshare recently, and I know based on the comments that you guys have as well. And if you're not familiar with Skillshare, you're gonna get familiar with Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform where lifelong learners can go to learn skills that will benefit them for a lifetime. And bro, I don't know if you know this about me. If you've seen videos before, you do. But I am a lifelong learner. I love to teach myself everything because I'm not very good at delegating. I'm more of like a hands-on person. And especially where this channel is concerned, I do everything myself. I do all the writing myself, the editing myself, the research myself, everything, because I'm just the type of person who wants to know how to do it because one, I'm a bit of a control freak, and two, I just think it's useful to have the skills yourself. If you are capable of learning this particular skill, which these skills I have been capable of learning, I think it's important to know how to do them yourselves in case you ever need to be able to do them yourself. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I just feel like an education is very, very invaluable. So if you're anything like me, you will love Skillshare because it is an online learning community, as I said, that offers thousands of classes to a community of members across 150 countries. And they offer these classes in a variety of subjects, from classes on vegan cooking, at-home workouts, or what I'm most excited about right now, and that's classes on American Sign Language, because I don't know if you know this, I don't know why you would, but my sister is hard of hearing. So I've always wanted to broaden my ASL vocabulary. So recently I started taking a class called ASL Useful Parent/Child Signs and Phrases. And this class is taught by Able Lingo. And I have really been enjoying it because it teaches you the signs for different simple phrases that I can teach to my baby so that we can communicate before he's verbal, which has been super rad because he already understands the sign for milk. Milk, milk, milk. And it's really fun to like do the sign at him and see his face kind of light up and know that he understands what I'm saying. And I can see that, yes, at this moment, he wants milk and we can communicate that way even though he can't speak yet. And that's just one of the many things about Skillshare that I have found to be so beneficial. If you were to become a Skillshare member, you would have access to thousands of classes across a multitude of subjects, like anything your heart desires, anything you really want to learn about, you could learn about with Skillshare. And something that's very important that I think a lot of us, especially us parents, can find to be incredibly valuable is that you can do it at your own pace. You don't have to be on the schedule of somebody else. It's whenever you can find a couple minutes of your own time for yourself in the day, you can sit down and learn whatever it is that your little heart desires. With that said, Skillshare is offering the first 1,000 members of the Brat Pack to click the link at the top of my description box the opportunity to explore all of the classes that Skillshare has to offer for free for 1 month. So if you're like me and you want to join a community of rad lifelong learners and jump into some classes that'll teach you skills that can benefit you for a lifetime, click the link at the top of my description box to let Skillshare know that I'm the one that sent you, and the first 1,000 members to do so will get 1 month free to peruse and love on all of the classes that Skillshare has to offer starting today. And now I just want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. I love working with them. And of course I want to thank you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You guys rock. Don't ever change. So now that I'm done spreading the good word of Skillshare, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now this video is on a case that was requested several times from a member of the Brat Pack named the Crochet Witch. Hello, Miss Crochet Witch. Thank you, Miss Crochet which I told you guys, if you just comment over and over on every video you watch, the case that you want me to cover, if you do it more than once, it's more likely that I will cover it because it's just simply, you know, insight in mind. I saw her comment several times and I was like, you know what, fine, let's do it. And this is a case that I did know about. Like, I definitely remembered Grant Amato's stupid face, like I'd seen it. I watched part of the trial on YouTube, but I learned about the case in a very surface level sort of way. And now that I've done a deep dive into it, wow, 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 it's so sad. If you know this case, you know, and if you don't, it just feels like Grant's family did everything they could for him. They loved him, they coddled him, they tried to protect him from himself and from the law, quite frankly. And in response, he murdered all of them and then went on to try to disrespect and ruin the memory of the person who he was arguably the closest with, his own brother. So today I'm going to tell you that entire story. And it's a long one. Buckle in. It is a long one and it's a messed up one. But at the end of the video, I want you to answer a question of the day. And that is this. But I want you to absorb all the information first. Don't leave it now. Do you believe that Grant Amato murdered his family as an act of anger because they had outed him to the woman that he loved as a fake? Or do you think he murdered them so that he could benefit monetarily from them, from their deaths, to fuel his obsession? Now, with all of that said, I'm going to tell you the story now. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of Grant Amato, the family annihilator. And I want to start today's video off, as I most of the time do, sometimes do, often do, and that's with a quote that I think will adequately wet your whistle for what we're going to be discussing today. It'll give you an idea of the content of today's video, and that is, and I quote, "Obsession, money, and lies tore Grant Amato's family apart. A jury will decide whether he killed them." On January 26, 2019, at about 9:15 a.m. in Chulliota, Florida, police responded to a call for a welfare check on a home located on Sultan Circle. One of the 4 occupants of the home, a 31-year-old man named Cody Amato, had not shown up for work at his job at the Advent Hospital in East Orlando, and according to his coworker, Cody had never missed a day of work before. When police arrived at the home, they found Cody's car in the driveway, and they also found 2 other cars in the garage. So they go and they knock on the doors, they knock on the windows, nobody responds. Nobody answers the phones when they're being called. The police are like calling their phones, nobody's answering. And nobody answers or responds when they literally start blowing an air horn outside of the house. So at this point, police are like, okay, this is suspicious. So they decide they're going to go in the home. The doors are locked, so an officer uses a knife to bust his way into the house. And when they do, that's when they find the bodies, not just of Cody, but of his parents as well. As police moved through the home, the first person that they found was 59-year-old Chad Amato, the father. He was lying on the ground in the kitchen, and he had been shot twice in the back of the head, one of which was execution style while he was on the ground. There was blood found all over his open lunchbox, and he was wearing a holster with a handgun at the time. It was apparent upon further investigation that the holster and the gun that was on his body at the time did appear to have been planted there because there was blood under the holster that could not have gotten there if he had been wearing it at the time that he was killed. So it looked like it had been put on him after the fact. And what strengthened this theory is that the holster was put on him in such a way that somebody who was left-handed would have worn it because of the way he would have, taken out the gun. And he was not a left-handed person. Next to be found was 61-year-old Margaret Amato. Margaret was found slumped over her keyboard at her computer desk with a glass of wine next to her. Family pictures were on her desk, and her son's graduation photos were spread along nearby shelves. She too had been shot in the back of the head execution style, and it appeared that she was the first person who had been killed. 31-year-old Cody Amato was the last to be found, and he appeared to have been the last to be murdered. Cody had been shot in the face, and when he was found, there was blood coming out of his eyes, which is just so messed up. And he was sort of found curled into the doorway between the garage and the home gym in the fetal position. He was still dressed in his nurse's scrubs from the night before, and a gun, bullets, and his work bag were laying beside him. And his body appeared to have been moved after death. Again, the scene seemed a bit staged because based on the blood spatter, it appeared when Cody was shot, the door that was behind him had been open, but when he was found, that door was shut. So, a whole family, well, almost an entire family, is murdered in their home for no obvious reason. It didn't appear to have been a break-in, like a robbery gone wrong, because nothing had been taken from the home, and there was also no sign of forced entry. So for whatever reason, all these members of this family were systematically murdered one by one. And why? Why would this have happened? Well, to answer this question, we have to talk about who the Amatos were. So the Amatos were a family, obviously, and they lived in Chulliota, Florida, which is about a 30-minute drive from Orlando. And they owned a big, beautiful home. The point is that the Amato family had some money, okay? They were doing pretty well. Margaret Amato, who is known to some as Peggy, was known as just being like a good woman. She was said to have been known for two things: loving her family and loving horses. She was even the type of lady who adopted an elderly, like, former racehorse named Lady, and she tamed the wild beast, being bucked off of this horse several times, but never giving up. She would, like, ride over to these nearby stables every day to go and, like, hang out with this horse and try to rehabilitate this horse. And she ended up being successful, and her and the horse were, like, buddies. Her and Lady were, like, pals, until Lady inevitably died because she was an elderly horse. She loved horses so much that even after her horse had died, she still went to the stables all the time to visit other horses. And she was so, like, known and present at these stables that after Margaret was killed, the owner, Sherry, had a plaque put up in Margaret's honor that read, and I quote, "To our barn sister Margaret and her lady, thank you for the love and friendship. We will ride with you in our hearts forever." Margaret to me just sounded like a nice lady who, like, loved animals, and we love people who love animals because good people love animals. Bad people probably love animals too, but Margaret wasn't one of those. She was a good person who loved animals. And, like, on her Facebook page, she even, like, shared one of those posts about not locking your dog in a hot car, which is, like, common sense, but some people don't get it. But Margaret got it. And one of her neighbors, after she was killed, said of Margaret, and I quote, "She had a strong sense of righteousness for those who couldn't do anything for themselves. When a good person leaves this earth too soon, you just have to question why. The world needs more good people." Now, Margaret was married to Chad Amato, her husband, obviously, and he called her the moon to his sun. He said that he was fortunate to have her as his soulmate, and said that the two shared a, quote, "same spiritual wavelength." The two just sounded like they really loved each other, at least as much as you can tell by getting a small glimpse into someone's life who you've never met and who can't tell you about themselves because they're no longer here, and just from what you can find online. They seemed like they loved each other. When they got married, Margaret had a son from a previous relationship named Jason, and Chad adopted him and went on to love him just as much as he loved the two boys that him and Margaret then had together. Cody Amato, who we talked about in the beginning, Grant Amato, who we'll talk about at length, obviously, and then Jason, who we won't talk about as much because when this murder happened, Jason was already moved out of the house and living on his own at this time. So Chad Amato was said to have been a loving father, but a bit of a stricter man. But he considered himself to be a mentor to his boys, and he was proud of them because they were also part of the healthcare industry just like he was and just like Margaret was. Chad was a big outdoors man. He loved climbing, hiking, cycling, pretty much anything that got him outside, since most of his job kept him inside. So he loved doing anything that was, like, totally opposite of his job. Growing up, Chad had gone to private schools before graduating and going to the University of Florida with plans to be a chemist. He ended up changing his mind, though, after finding that working in a lab was kind of a lonely experience. And his father, who was a pharmacist, was like, "Hey, you majored in chemistry, why don't you follow in my footsteps and try being a pharmacist?" And Chad did just that, and he found that he liked it because it was more socially interactive and he wanted to be more of a social person. He loved film noir, building computers, going to sports games. The family was said to be a football family, and their team were the Gators. I don't know sports. He loved rock and roll, and he loved horses like his wife, and he seemed to me, from what I could see online, to have a good sense of humor because he posted this photo online of a pumpkin wearing sunglasses that spoke to my soul a little bit. Now on to the boys. Grant and Cody were super close. They were close in age, so as they grew up, they were brothers and friends, and they had similar interests. They both really loved anime. I guess Cody introduced Grant to anime, and the two would, like, download full series and just sit and binge watch them, even as adults, and then sit in the kitchen and, like, drink their coffee and recap what they had just watched. They were also big fans of guns. Cody and Grant were, including airsoft guns and actual firearms. And they were both members of this competitive airsoft team called Remedy. The two were just said to have been inseparable. In high school, they decided to join the weightlifting team together. They planned on buying matching BMWs and living in their parents' home after Chad and Margaret moved out because they had bought a retirement home for themselves in Tennessee. And they were like, okay, when they move out, we're going to buy this house, we're going to live together, we're going to drive our BMWs, we're going to be best friends, it's going to be great. They even decided to go to nursing school together to follow in the footsteps of their parents, who were both in the medical field. Margaret was a an operations manager for a healthcare company, I believe. And then Chad Amato was a pharmacist at CVS. Pharmacist at CVS. Now this is where our story is going to take a turn. This is where things start to go south for Grant Amato specifically, and this is when he gets a job in the medical field that things start to not be so tight for him. So Grant failed out of anesthesiology school, which is already putting a damper, like a little bit of a hindrance on the plans that him and his brother had to like do everything together and, you know, be the same person essentially. But that's not the only bad thing that happened. At the same time, you know, when it rains, it pours. Grant ended up getting fired from his job and arrested for grand theft when he was caught stealing like $2,000 worth of prescription medication. I guess he was stealing sedatives. It was the same sedative that killed Michael Jackson, I read online. And he said that he was stealing these because he wanted to give more drugs to patients that he didn't feel like were being adequately comforted by their doctors, which is like a whole nother thing. And later, I guess the charges got dropped, and people think that they got dropped because the hospital didn't want to be liable for him like overdosing patients essentially. So he got arrested. The charges ended up being dropped. But when he got caught for this and the confrontation happened, Grant ended up saying things that made them think that he was suicidal. So he was evaluated at that point as well, because they were like, okay, like that's not good. That's scary. Like you're getting arrested and you're saying you're going to kill yourself, right? So he's evaluated and he's found that he's not a risk to himself enough, at least, to be held on like an involuntary hold. But the point is, things overall, not so good. So Grant's bummed out, right? Like his life's not going exactly how he planned. Things are kind of falling down around him. Okay. So what does he do in his time of sorrow? Well, he takes to the internet, of course, as a lot of us do. And I have no qualms with the internet, obviously. Like go hard online, as I do. He starts going on and he starts deciding he wants to be a Twitch streamer. So he starts doing that a little bit, and that's fine. That's cool. That's free. That's something to keep his mind off of things. But then he starts getting into the habit of watching live cam girls, like cam models online. You know, if you know, you know, if you don't, it's like girls will just have a camera on them while they're in their room and they're doing things from innocent things to real sexy things, you know, whatever they choose to do. And Grant starts partaking in this, which is fine, except for that Grant is like broke, right? He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have an income. So how is he funding this new passion of his? Well, by stealing money from his father and brother, of course. He starts stealing money from them. He also starts stealing possessions from them that he can then sell to get more money to fuel his new interest that ends up morphing into obsession. So Grant's family would start to notice the missing money, the missing objects, the missing possessions, objects, same, but different, but still same. Anyway, they'd notice this and they'd ask him like, so what you doing with our money, bro? And he would say that he was taking money, using money to promote himself on Twitch, because if you promote yourself, you pay to promote yourself, you get more of an audience, you get more views, you get more money, got to spend money to make money, because he's trying to make himself a famous Twitch streamer. And they're like, cool, that's great. But his dad's not stoked about this. He's not stoked to see that he's taking money, putting it into something that's not really doing anything. He's not happy that he got arrested. He's not happy that he lost his job. So they start fighting. They start having the same argument over and over that never really gets resolved. It's one of those things that just, the fight stops for a little bit, then picks up where it left off, and they keep just repeating themselves, and nothing good's coming of it. And on top of that, his family starts to kind of worry about Grant, because he's seeming to be depressed. He's seeming to think that he's worthless, that his life has no meaning, no purpose. And they're worried that he might, hurt himself. And he starts, staying up all night and sleeping all day. And they're just really concerned with where his life is headed. But in reality, Grant wasn't staying up all night and sleeping all day because he was depressed and because he had lost himself. I mean, he might have been those things as well. But what was really keeping Grant up at night is that he had met someone, in a sense. Grant had come upon a specific cam model while he was perusing these websites. And this was a woman named Sylvie, who went by the name Sylvie, who was from Bulgaria. And he was Twitter-pated, dude. He became quickly obsessed with her. He started watching her for hours every single night, like basically on a schedule. To watch Sylvie, it cost Grant 90 tokens per minute. So he would spend 600 actual dollars buying 5,000 tokens at a time, which only got him about an hour of view time. And if he would watch 4 hours, which is what he ended up doing, is watching her for 4 hours a night, that added up to 21,600 tokens, which was roughly 2,500 actual dollars a night to watch this woman. It's just insane. He even went on not just to pay to watch her, but he would buy things for her that he would then send her, like flowers, lingerie, sex toys, and then she would use them and or model them for him. And he was all about it, saying to her in one instance, and I quote, "I can't wait to fucking watch you be super innocent in those tempting panties." This got to be very expensive, as I'm sure you can imagine, and eventually he graduated from not only stealing from his father and his brother, but also stealing from extended family. They found that he had the credit card information for his aunt, his uncle, his grandma, okay? And his Aunt Donna caught on to this, and at the time she caught on to this, Grant was actually living with her for a time, which we're gonna get into in a second. But while he was living with her, they had actually locked up all their guns because they thought he was suicidal, which is neither here nor there, but I thought it was worth mentioning since his mental health does come in, it's in the conversation kind of a lot. But while he's staying with them, his Aunt Donna, notices that she's losing money as well. So for some backstory on that real quick on like how he ended up living with his aunt, because there's just so much to this story, but this I think is important. So Grant had gotten to the point where he was tired of fighting with his family. He was tired of being there, him and his dad always fighting. It was getting to be a lot for him. He was feeling upset, depressed, worthless. It just wasn't really an ideal situation for him anymore. So he decided he was going to leave and go to his aunt's house. But when he did this, his family didn't know that that's where he was going at the time. He didn't say anything. He just up and left, okay, without giving any information. And his family got very worried because of the mental state he had been in. So they called the police and they reported him missing. They told the police that their son had recently met with a mental health professional, which he had, and that he had expressed being depressed with his life and the circumstances that he had found himself in. And because of this, because he had been feeling depressed, they were worried that since he had just left without saying anything to anyone, he just like got up, got in his car and drove away, that he might be in danger of hurting himself. And to strengthen that theory, his mother showed police that he had texted her after he left saying that he was fed up, he was tired of his life, he was tired of feeling the way he was, and he was going to, quote, handle this in his own way. So reading these texts, Margaret and Cody, his brother, freaked out, obviously. They were worried that he'd hurt himself because of how he had been, what he was saying, and the fact that he had access to guns. So they called the police. They report him missing. He's found at his aunt's house. And when police speak to him, they determine that he's not a threat to himself. He doesn't qualify as somebody who needs to be like admitted or anything. So they like leave, and they leave him at his aunt's. But his family isn't particularly like comfortable with this. They're worried that he might try to run farther or still hurt himself. So they end up actually staking out the aunt's house, taking 12-hour shifts sitting outside to watch him to make sure he doesn't leave or that he doesn't do anything, right? And it's at this point that they decide that like Grant needs an intervention for what's going on in his life. So they do that. They have an intervention. The entire family gets together. They talk to him and they're like, listen, because at this point they've figured out like where that money's going. Okay, which we're going to get into. They find out about that. So they're like, listen, you need to get some help. And he's kind of testy at first, but they convince him to go into a sex rehab facility for his obsession, right? And it was at this point, this was the last time that Jason saw his brother, his father, his mother. It's the last time that he saw them again because they get in the car to leave to go to the rehab center. And shortly after this is when they're killed. Now, I hope all that made sense because this timeline does get a little like, what the fuck? Because there's a lot going on. So that's how he ends up at his aunt's house. So he's living with his aunt. She finds out he's stealing money from her. So she contacts his immediate family to let them know what's going on. And they're like, listen, we know he has a problem. We're working on it with him. Please don't call the police. And I guess she was speaking to Chad Amato, the dad, and he started crying. Like, he broke down on the phone with her. And this wasn't his sister. This was his sister-in-law. This is his wife's sister. And he's just crying on the phone with her. And she said this was the one time that she had ever heard him cry in like the decades that she had known him. I guess during this call, he told her that he had already had to take a second mortgage out on the family home to pay back the $150,000 debt that Grant had already put them. That's absolutely insane to me. But he said, and this is so heartbreaking, he said that because of this, he was probably going to have to wait a couple more years to retire, that he was going to have to work longer than he had to, but that he would do it. He would do it for Grant because he didn't want Grant to get in trouble and he didn't want Grant to go to jail. All in all, Grant Amato stole $200,000 of his family's money to watch Sylvie. He convinced Sylvie and others in the chat room that watched her that he was rich, that he was a super wealthy gamer and drove a BMW, and he would try to like outbid other watchers to keep these appearances up, even though he didn't have any of his own money. He became addicted to it, addicted to her. He thought he was in love with her. He talked to her every day, and it just seemed to like slip his mind, or like he was unable to grasp the concept that he was paying her for the girlfriend experience. You know, he like thought she really was his girlfriend, thought that they had a relationship, thought that she cared about him. He was so delusional, man. There's this video that you can watch on YouTube of him where he actually sent her like a video of him recording himself walking outside, where he asks her like, pretty please, can you send me a free video? I really want to see you and I feel weird paying you. It's like, that's the whole relationship, bro, is you paying her and her giving you the service that you're paying for, which is the girlfriend experience. But he was so, like, he really thought that there was more to it than that. And you would think that he'd know that based on how much he was spending on her, that this was a transaction, but it just, I don't know, it's like he knew, but he didn't know, because he later says in an interview to police that, like, he understands that it's idiotic for him to spend that much money on her, especially since he wasn't making the money, but that he did it anyway. It's just, he's something. I don't know what that something is, but he's something. And meanwhile, according to Grant, while he's going through all this and like becoming obsessed with Sylvie, that happening on this side, he's dealing with the pressures and the drama at home with his dad being super pissed about him, you know, not having a job, doing Twitch, but not really making any money and not making marketable steps towards getting a job that will make money, and that he said his dad was overbearing. But I mean, if you really think about what his dad's doing, his dad is sitting there supporting his deadbeat, almost 30-year-old son, right? He doesn't have to do that. He's choosing to do that. He could be pissed that his son's being a little moocher and not really doing anything to contribute. I think that that's reasonable. But Grant didn't like it. He's allowed to not like it also, right? That's okay as well. And it was to the point that he like clearly wanted to disassociate from the life he had. So in 2018, like at the end of 2018, so in the thick of everything going on, because they're killed like at the beginning of 2019, Grant ends up taking a trip to Japan with his brother and a friend, which is like, bro, you have no money. But I guess Cody is the one who paid for him. Cody, his brother, paid his way to go to Japan because he wanted to help Grant like have a good time and get his mind off things and see, you know, the culture over there, since they loved anime, like the whole thing. And I guess according to the friend that also went with them, at one point before they were going to be leaving, Grant disappeared for a couple of hours, and it's because he didn't want to go home because he just was unhappy with how his life was. So now to get the timeline a little more on track, this is the point around the time that he went to Japan and he came back from Japan. This is the point where his family found out about Silly, found out about where all the stolen money was going, found out about the website, found out about everything, and they were not happy. And this is when they had the intervention and decided to send him into that 60-day program for sex addiction and internet addiction. Like, this is when all of that happened. It was right around the time that he got back from Japan. So they end up putting him in this rehabilitation clinic to try and help him. And this cost his brother Cody thousands of dollars, dude, but he was willing to pay it even though he had already paid for Grant's attorney when he got arrested. And it also paid $10,000 towards Grant's Japan trip. But anyways, he does the rehab program, telling friends later that he had stayed, quote, just long enough to convince his family that he was fine to come home. Like he was supposed to stay for 60 days, but he only stayed for 2 weeks and then left. And anyways, it was when he was released, when he left this program, that it was kind of like a final straw. Him and his dad had a sit down, and during the sit down, his dad gave him like a written list of rules that he needed to follow if he wanted to keep living in the family home and keep having them support him. And basically his options were to stay in the home and follow these rules, or he could go join the military, right? Because then he'd be taken care of as well. But his dad didn't really think he had what it took to join the military. And I guess his dad wasn't like super nice about how he said he didn't think Grant could handle the military. Like, his brother Jason later said that when he read the contract and he read what his dad had righted, that he thought his dad was kind of trying to make Grant seem like less of a person by listing all the ways that he wouldn't be able to hack it in the military, one of them being that he was like too underweight. Among these rules, Grant was to get a job during the day and stop spending the entire night online. Basically, he'd have no internet access after midnight. His phone service was going to be terminated, and he would have limited access to TV, and he needed to go to therapy. And in addition to this, his family would no longer be paying for his debts, and it also said that if Grant reached out to Sylvie again, he would be kicked out of the home. And Grant did agree to all of these things, but this last one in particular, he felt like wasn't fair because him and Sylvie had a relationship. That was his girlfriend, and he should be able to talk to her. But Grant, you guys didn't have a relationship. She wasn't your girlfriend. And you didn't have the right to talk to her if it meant stealing money from your family to do so. Now, on top of getting out and learning all that, which would already be a shock, even though these are like basic things that like you probably should do because you're an adult, it's still a shock because it's a big change. He also learned that while he was in the program, his family had gotten access to his computer and other devices. They had found out how to contact Sylvie and had gone ahead and done just that and let her and all the like people that he was friends with in her room know that Grant was essentially a fake and a phony and had stolen from his family in order to fund the lifestyle he was pretending to have for their benefit. Or really for his benefit, but to look good for all of them, to seem like a, more successful person than he was. And in response to this, in January, so like right before the murders, Sylvie cut him off completely and made it so he could no longer access her particular room. Now this really devastated Grant. He said he would never be able to forgive himself for hurting Sylvie, for betraying her trust, and he said he was no longer able to function normally without her and that he would never get over her. And that would be messed up, right? It would be messed up for his family to do that. I don't know really how I feel about that portion. I understand it. I don't know if it's something I would do, but I do understand it because they want her to know, so maybe she would stop him from spending all of his money on her. You know what I mean? Like, I can get it, but I don't know how I feel about it. And the rules. I know that some people might be like, damn, those are like some extreme rules, right? But we need to remember that Grant is almost 30 years old, and he could just move out and get a job, right? He doesn't have to stay with them and deal with this if he does not want to. But he's like weighing like it's just like with Jennifer Pan, you know what I mean? Like weighing the rules and what you have to deal with the fact that if you don't, you just have to like take care of yourself like an adult, you know what I mean? And he chose to stay. And speaking of these rules, the second to last line on the list of rules had been scratched out, but I think what it did read, because you can still read it, illustrated like what his family was really feeling at the time, what his dad was feeling at the time. And this line had said, and I quote, "You chose a stranger, physically non-existent, over family." Now, Grant agreed to all these rules and agreed to this ultimatum, but despite agreeing to that, he still did obviously try to contact Sylvie. He would get on his mom's phone since he didn't have the internet access or his phone, and he would contact her on Twitter. Obviously, he had to do it publicly because she wasn't speaking to him. She was like, absolutely not, dog. So he would try to write her, and I didn't see anything that said that she wrote him back, but he was desperate to talk to her. And he said of his feelings during this time, and I quote, "I am unable to function normally without her. Not hearing her good mornings or good nights, not talking for hours a day. I truly loved this woman. I send her messages every day and get no response. She is my everything, and I will give her my life to simply be able to make her smile." Now, Grant was not able to keep the fact that he was still trying to talk to Sylvie a secret. And his dad did find out, and his dad confronted him about this on January 25th, 2019, so the day before the murders, or the day before the bodies were found. And apparently, according to Grant, his dad was super pissed and got confrontational, grabbed him by his shirt and told him to pack up his shit and get the fuck out. So now we're back to the date of the murders. And if you recall, they go to the family, they do a welfare check, and that's when they find the bodies of the family that I've been discussing all this time in the way that I described previously that they were found, okay? So police find them, and when they do, they decide to shut down the whole street. They blocked off the entire street of Sultan Circle so that they could do their investigation. Once police got there and they started investigating, they felt right from the beginning that this was a personal murder and that it wasn't like a stranger who came in and killed this family. They also knew that there was somebody missing from the home, that there was a white Honda missing from the home, and that the driver was also missing, and this was Grant. And they knew about Grant and his car because they had been here before when Grant was reported missing, when he ran off to his aunt's. You remember? So that's why I gave you all the backstory on that, so that this part would make sense. So he's missing again now. But they speak to neighbors, and they do find out from neighbors that he had been there and his car had been there that morning. Now what's really crazy is that during the investigation, I told you they blocked off the street. Well, an officer had seen that a white car, a white Honda, had driven up towards the house, had seen the scene, had did a U-turn, and had left. Now, later, during their interrogation when they're speaking to Grant, or their interview when they're speaking to Grant, they do learn that this was Grant. This, like, U-turn bro was Grant. He said that he had come home, as one does, because he lived there, and he saw the commotion, okay? And he just left because he didn't want to know, okay? He says he then drove to a Panera to get on Wi-Fi, and when he did, he searched top news stories so he could find out what the commotion was. And he says that as he was watching the news stories, he saw that the gate for the home that had been shot up was his family's gate. So he knew that something had happened, but he never reached out to his family to find out if they were okay. So anyways, back to the investigation. They know that Grant is missing, that Grant's car is missing. And they know that even though there were guns found in the home, there was guns found near the bodies, you know, Chad had one in his holster, Cody had one left near him, that there were some guns that could have been missing from the home. So they have a press conference, and they say during the press conference that people in the area should be on the lookout for Grant and for Grant's car, but not to approach him because he should be considered armed and dangerous. It didn't take police long to find Grant. They found him the following morning at a motel, Holiday Inn. No, they found him at the Doubletree Hotel. And when they got there, they were just going to detain him for questioning, but he seemed to think he was being arrested right away. It was super weird. The whole situation was weird. They come in his room, let us in. They come in the room, and he gets down on the floor and is immediately ready to be arrested and puts up no fight. And then they're out together in the hallway, and he's go ahead and go in my room and search for weapons, go ahead, you can do whatever you want. And it's just weird for him to react this way, especially since at this time he's supposedly not supposed to know that his family is dead. So why would he act like this? That's one of the things that I thought was weird and maybe made him look a little suspicious among many things. But either way, he was taken in at that point and detained for questioning. He wasn't even being arrested at this point. During Grant's questioning, which lasted hours, he was said to have been super chill. He was super open. He was chatty. He talked to police about his hobbies, his interests, his recent troubles with his mental health, with the money issues, the sex addiction, everything. He told police that the night before he and his father had gotten into a fight and that it had gotten heated. He was open about that. He said that his dad got a little confrontational, grabbed him by the shirt, didn't hit him though, and kicked him out of the house. He says that his mother didn't engage in the argument, that she just stayed in her office working on her computer. And he said that for the next couple hours after him and his dad first started fighting, he started collecting his things, and that during that process, him and his dad just argued here and there throughout the day. Now, it's at this point in the story where he tells two different versions. The first version of the story is that he only stays at his family's house till 9 or 9:30, and then he leaves and just drives down the street or something and waits for Cody to come home, where they could just randomly run into each other because he doesn't have a cell phone to tell his brother where to meet him, where they can run into each other, and that his brother was telling him, tell me what happened. He told him what happened. He said, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And then he left. So that was his first version, which made no sense. Police are that makes no sense. So he's okay. I did stay at the house until Cody got home from work, which was closer to midnight. But when I left, everyone was fine. Everyone was alive. And Cody told me not to worry, that he would take care of everything. So Grant talked. He talked and he talked and he talked. He talked a lot. He was very open, kind of like I'm being right now. He's very, very vocal. But it's what he didn't say. It's what he didn't ask, rather, that investigators found weird. They were hours into their interview, and Grant had never once asked why he was there, what had happened to his family. So that's when the investigators decided to sort of shake the tree and see what fell loose, so to speak. They decide to show him crime scene photos. They take out crime scene photos that show his family's deceased bodies. They pull out his brother Cody's photo, show it to him. His father Chad's photo, show it to him. His mother Margaret's photo, show it to him. With each one, they're like, is this what you did? Is this how you left your family? Did you kill your family? And with each photo, he started to break down and he said, no. He cried, he denied it. But then he said something that was super, super weird to investigators. When investigators asked him if he felt any remorse for what he did, he said, and I quote, his family had been blaming him for months for ruining their lives, stealing, and not following the rules of the home. So he might as well be blamed for this too. So a weird thing to say, right? Very, very strange to say in the situation that he's in. But despite that, he continued to deny being involved, but he did admit that he was the only person with the motive and the opportunity to have killed them. Now, what's really sad here is during this questioning, Grant's surviving brother, Jason, his older brother, did come down to speak with Grant. And I guess what happened is that even though Jason wasn't super close with his father and his brother anymore, he didn't really talk to them much. He did talk to his mom, though he talked to his mom once a week, and he had actually just talked to his mom like right before this happened, and she said that things were going good, and that Grant was like looking for a job, which is just so sad. Anyways, Jason was still Cody's emergency contact, so when Cody didn't show up for work that day, the hospital called him first, and I guess they were really worried about it, but one, because he was always there, and two, because he was supposed to be in surgery that morning, so it was weird that he wasn't there. So he gets this call, and he starts calling his mom, and he starts calling his dad, he starts calling Cody. He doesn't call Grant, though, and he says that he doesn't call Grant because he had a feeling that Grant's drama is the reason that Cody wasn't at work in the first place, which is just so sad. But he calls, he doesn't get a hold of them, and he's at work, so he's doing his thing, and then a little bit of time goes by, and the hospital calls him back and tells him that he should be expecting a call from the police. So Cody says when he found out about what happened to his family, he was at work, and he says that the whole situation was really scary, that like police showed up to his work and they shut down the whole building, and then they went to him to talk to him, and they told him that like they were very generic with what they said. They just said that a woman and two men were found dead in his family's home. So he doesn't even know exactly who's been killed, right? And then he finds out who's dead. And then he finds out that Grant's still alive and that Grant's like being questioned. And they ask him like if there's anyone that he can think of who would want to hurt his family. And he actually tells them about Sylvie because they don't know who she is. She's just this elusive woman who Grant's given their home address to. That I guess like Grant gave her their address so she would send him the goodies that he paid for in the mail, like cards and notes and things like that. So she had their address, and I guess Margaret was nervous about that. So Jason tells police that, and I can't even imagine how he's feeling. Like he goes in and he talks to Grant and he starts asking him for information, and he says of this, and I quote, I only remember him saying that he had nothing to do with it when I first walked in. And if you watch the footage online, which you can, like the whole thing was videotaped, you see Jason and Grant talking. And as Jason goes to leave the room, like the very last thing he says to his brother, which is really heartbreaking, is he says to his brother, quote, I'll pray for you, brother, because I can't pray for mom, dad, or Cody anymore. I just feel so bad for Jason, dude, having to learn that your whole family's dead, then having to learn that it was your own brother who did it. I feel so bad for survivors of family annihilators in general, because you have to live with that knowledge of what happened to your family, knowing that it's someone that you love that did it, and then knowing that you're likely only even here still because you weren't there at the time this happened. And Jason said of dealing with this, dealing with all of these swirling emotions and thoughts, I can't even imagine, but he said of this, and I quote, it's so hard to go through the grieving process when there are multiple losses and uncertainty in the future. Through all of this, though, I'm a proud Amato, and I will rise up smarter and stronger than before. So, after being questioned by police, Grant was initially released. He was said to have been cooperative, right? But they let him go. But clearly they were kind of like onto him because like right after he left, they got an arrest warrant for him so that they could arrest him the next day. And by the next day, I mean like just a couple hours later, because they arrested him just after 1 a.m. So it wasn't really like the next day, but it was technically the next day. And he was arrested without incident. So Grant Amato pled not guilty to the murders. And initially he asked that no bond be set because he wanted to be able to prepare his defense for trial outside of jail, but that wasn't going to be happening. So his attorneys asked that the bail only be set at $150,000, but the prosecution was like, how about we do a cool $25 million instead. And the judge came to a bit of a compromise, and he set the bail at $750,000, which was $250,000 for each member of his family that he murdered. Grant was also told that if he did make bail, if he was able to somehow come up with that money, he would have no access to computers or online data and no contact with any of the witnesses. He would also have to wear a monitoring device and have to stay in the Florida area, and he'd have to forfeit his passport. And the worst of all for him, I'm sure, is that he was not allowed to use any money from his family's estate to post bail. So he'd have to come up with this money on his own. And when his brother Jason was asked if he was going to help bail Grant out of jail. Whoa, that sentence sounded super weird, but it's not. When he was asked if he was going to bail Grant out of jail, Jason said no. After Grant was arrested, the prosecution was able to collect a lot more evidence that they could use against him in trial. Not just the stuff that they were able to get at the scene and get through speaking with people and things like that, but also from Grant himself, because he just wasn't super careful once he was arrested. They collected jailhouse phone calls and emails where Grant talked about the case and also talked about his family's life insurance policies. He even emailed writers and filmmakers saying if they could just find anyone to post his bail, he would give them the rights to his story. Which it's okay. As far as evidence, they collected a flash drive, and on this flash drive there were numerous different pornographic images of Sylvie that she had sent to him, because he purchased them, of course. They also found notes and letters written back and forth from them, because again, he was paying for the girlfriend experience, and of these they found a photo of her. It was a Christmas card with a photo of her on it, and she had written to him, quote, "Smile, my love, you make me happy." And it was swapped, sealed with a kiss. And you know what's really fucked up about this flash drive? This is so gross. So they were able to figure out from detective work, policing, doing the police stuff. They were able to figure out that this flash drive was put into Grant Amato's computer the night of the murders at about 11:30 p.m. And based on the prosecution's timeline of what happened and when, members of his family were dead at this point. So he was sitting there looking at these sexually explicit photos of Sylvie while his family lay dead in the home that he's in. What? Gross. Grant is gross. Gross Grant Amato. Yes. Gross Grant Amato. Yes. Yes. Police also found a letter that Grant had written to his friends that he had met in Sylvie's room. So, okay, forgive me if I get something wrong. I've never partook in one of these services, but from what I could gather from looking at her online site, because there is still a site up for her, is that basically Sylvie has a room. So people come to her room specifically. They buy tokens. They can pay her to do specific things. There's a menu. You pick off it, you pay. You can tell her what you want her to do, and she'll do it for you, right? And Sylvie had regulars. And these regulars would always be in her room. Grant was one of the regulars. And the regulars all became buds with each other, which is just kind of ew, but okay. So all these dudes that watched Sylvie, Grant was friends with them. So when his parents went and blew up his spot and told them that he was a fake, they found out too. So Grant lost his woman, and he also lost his friends. So he wrote a letter to these people. And in this letter, it kind of gave you some insight into Grant's mind at that time. He wrote to them that his dad was controlling, that his brother was controlling as well and didn't understand how Grant could love Sylvie so much, and that his mother was simply around for security, whatever that means. He also said in this letter of lying to Sylvie, and I quote, "I hate myself for what I did, and I hate the thought of never getting to be with her again. After everything that I gave and everything that I tried to do with her, I just can't comprehend being without her." So he did what he had to do, right? Idiot. Police also spoke to Cody's girlfriend, Sloan, and it's actually so sad. Okay, they had just started dating, I guess. They worked together at the hospital, and they had been friends first, and just in the months right before he was killed, they started a quiet little relationship. And I just don't know how you deal with that. I imagine being in her position and having to deal with the fact that you kind of had a future stolen from you that never quite got started in the first place, and knowing how to appropriately feel about that. I don't know how to really explain it, but I just imagine the people in my life, not romantically obviously, but the people in my life that I care a lot about, friends who are distant friends, friends online, for example, friends that you know and that you see and you talk to often, but you don't hang out with often. And if something was to happen to them, how you would deal with that separation of like caring a lot, but what's appropriate. It just seems really weird. I don't know how to explain it, but I just feel like that's super, super sad. She just said that Cody was like the best person, that he was a really nice guy with like a positive attitude, like a good outlook on life, that he seemed just like a good person, and that his loss was felt profoundly with them. And she said that like, it's hard to come to terms with the fact that he'll always just be 31 years old. It's just like what Mickey Schoonig's mom said, that she'll forever be 21, he'll forever be 31, and that's really hard for her to like grasp. But anyways, I got off on a thing there because it's just really sad to me, because these are like real people and their lives are really gone, and I get really consumed in that because it's important. But anyway, when they spoke to Sloan, she gave them a bit of information that is really eerie. It's something that Cody said, that in what happened here, in finding what happened here and how this all played out, it's incredibly eerie. She said that Cody told her that he was worried that Grant would kill everyone. And considering that he did, it's so fucked up that Cody felt that and knew that. That makes my heart just like hurt. So police also searched Grant's car, and it was when searching Grant's car that they found a piece to the puzzle that kind of explained like the weird things at the scene, the stage things at the scene, the bodies being moved, the holster being put on Chad, the gun and the bullets being put near Cody. It seemed to police, based on what they found in his car, that Grant was going to try to make it seem like Cody had killed his parents and then killed himself. Now I'm going to get on to my thoughts about that specifically a little bit later, because I think we'll get to that later, but that's what police believed. That Grant was going to try to frame Cody after he was dead for killing his parents. So basically what they found inside the car was a letter. It was written by Grant, but was written from Cody's point of view. It was written like it was written by Cody. And this letter read, and I quote, "Grant, I'll take care of all your problems. I just need you back. I can't live without you, brother. I said I'd take care of all your problems at the house, and I have. No one will ever bother you again regarding this. Just please come home." Now, police did ask Grant about this, obviously, because that's fucking weird. They were like, what the fuck is this? And he said that he was just jotting down the last conversation he had with his brother for whatever reason, right? But when they asked, like, okay, why is it written from Cody's point of view? Like he wrote it, he couldn't really explain that. But police were pretty sure they knew why, right? Like, he might have not admitted why, but they believed that it's because Grant wanted to make it seem like he had left, and his brother, who he was so close with, who everyone said Cody would do anything for Grant. Cody had taken care of all Grant's problems by killing their parents, and then maybe felt so bad about it that he then took his own life. It wasn't hard to disprove this, though. It wasn't hard to disprove this flimsy frame job, because it's either that Grant was like super lazy and didn't try that hard, or didn't really understand forensics at all and was just kind of like doing what he thought would be effective, but was totally ineffective. Now, first, and this is a pretty big one, is it was found, the pathologist who did the autopsies found that Cody's wounds couldn't have been self-inflicted. So that's a big, like, bang goes that theory right off the bat. Next, and this is another big one, is the blood spatter proved that when Cody was shot, the door that was behind him where he was found had been open. That's how he was in the frame, like laying in the door frame, right? But when the bodies were found, when the scene was found, the door was closed. And that would be pretty hard for Cody to do if he was dead from a gunshot wound to the face, right? Like, he's not going to then close the door behind him. That wouldn't work. And third, another thing that made them be like, well, obviously this didn't happen, is that after they were all dead, someone was trying to wipe Cody's phone, like, clean of anything. Again, he couldn't do this if he was dead. So, now I'm going to tell you what the prosecution believes happened that night. Grant has never admitted to what happened, so this is just speculation, but this is what they believe happened the night of the murders. It's thought that Margaret was the first of the family members to be killed. She was found dead, slumped over her computer, and her activity on the computer had halted, just come to a complete stop at 4:45 p.m., even though before that she had been actively working on it. So it's thought that the murder started at that point. Why it all started, like why he started at that point doing this, nobody knows. And it's also, nobody knows why he killed his mother. It's thought that she was simply killed because she was there. Because he didn't seem to have beef with his mom. Maybe he was upset with her because she didn't protect him. But she was said to have like babied him and called him and loved him a lot. So it's unclear as to why he actually killed her. From there, Grant waited in the home for his father to come home from work. And when he did come home from work, he was ambushed in the kitchen where he was shot once in the head, but it didn't kill him. There was evidence that showed he was still alive and he was like crawling through his own blood when he was down on the floor, and that he was then shot execution style in the back of the head. Now, while this was happening that night, Cody was at work, and I guess Cody got either a call or a text from his dad at about 9:15 p.m. And we know this because Sloan, his girlfriend, worked with him, and I guess he got this correspondence from his father, and he clearly seemed upset because Sloan asked him, like, what's wrong? And he just said, like, some stupid fucking bullshit. So Cody leaves work and he goes home. And Sloan texted him later to see if he was okay. And he said, like, everything's okay, don't worry about me. And I do wonder what time that text came in. And I honestly wonder if that text even was from Cody, now that I think about it, just based on how he was found. I wonder if he would have even been able to send that text. Because it seemed to me, at least like from the way I understood it, it seems like the prosecution thinks that this all happened pretty fast. And now that I think about it, I also wonder about that correspondence with his father, between his father and Cody. I'm wondering if it was a call or if it was a text, because if it was a text, it's possible that it wasn't even Chad who sent it, that Grant sent this text to Cody to like lure him home so he could do what he did. But that's like a rabbit trail that we honestly can't even afford to go down, because I know that this video is already long as hell. So Cody got home and he too was shot. And to me, it seems like he was shot pretty quickly. I mean, he was still wearing his work scrub and he had like his work bag on him. It was found near him when he was killed. I guess that doesn't necessarily mean he had just gotten home, but that's like the impression that I got. And the prosecution said of these murders, and I quote, "For over 4 hours, with the bodies of his dead mother and father in the house, the defendant waits for Cody to come home. By any definition of the word cold, these murders were cold." Right after the murders, Grant did some unthinkable things. The first thing he did is he stole his dad and his brother's cards, his debit cards and credit cards, which isn't that surprising for Grant, really. Like, he's proven that he doesn't give a fuck and he's a piece of shit. But the level of depravity this fool will drop to, okay? It appeared that Grant had taken his dead father's hand that was covered in his own blood. He had cleaned off his finger, cleaned the blood off his finger, and then had used his father's dead finger to open his phone and access his online banking app, and then transferred a bunch of money to himself. You can't even make this shit up. He then left the home. He drove to a nearby business where he could get on Wi-Fi, and he immediately tried to contact Sylvie. This is right after murdering his entire family. Well, except for Jason, but you know what I mean? Like, the prosecutor said of this, of him like killing them and immediately leaving and trying to go and talk to Sylvie, he said of this, and I quote, "His parents' and brother's bodies aren't even cold, and he's already reestablishing or trying to reestablish contact with Sylvie. He was just waiting for her to say, 'I love you too. Come to Bulgaria. Come see me.' But that didn't happen, and that's why we're here." The prosecution believed that he was planning to run. He was planning to get on a plane. He was planning to go to another country, likely Bulgaria, to be with Sylvie. And when he was arrested, his passport was found on him. He had it. There was something happening there, allegedly. Basically, the prosecution's position throughout the trial was that Grant had killed his family and then tried to stage it to look like a murder-suicide, that Cody had killed his parents and then killed himself. And that's why so much was weird at the scene. That's why it looked staged, why the bodies were moved, why a gun and bullets were placed near Cody's body, even though it was easily proven that this gun wasn't the murder weapon and the bullets had never been fired. And speaking of the murder weapon, because we haven't even talked about that, it was never found. The murder weapon is believed to have been a gun that belonged to Cody and Grant's friend Blake. And that's because Blake testified at trial that he remembered, like after the murders happened, he remembered that about 2 weeks before the murders, Grant had been alone in his room where the gun was stored, and that after that the gun was just missing. But the defense thought that this was kind of bullshit. They thought that it was very convenient that all of a sudden Blake just remembered this months later, because he didn't come forward with it right away, I guess. And that all of a sudden he was remembering this because it would help the prosecution. And the defense said of this and of Blake, and I quote, "Blake, with his incredible sense of timing, testifies, 'I think Grant stole my gun back in January. That's going to help the state, isn't it?' He wants to help the state produce a gun, an imaginary gun." The defense's position was basically just trying to give juries any reasonable doubt to hang their hat on. They said that there was no physical evidence. There was no physical evidence that Grant had committed these murders, which was true. He said that basically the police could have processed the scene better from day one. They could have done more to investigate, but that they had tunnel vision on Grant, so they didn't look at any other suspects, but that there was no physical evidence to prove that Grant had done it. They even went out on a limb and tried to say that the family might have been killed because of drugs, because when the house was searched, they found like weed and like growing equipment in the master bedroom, I think in the closet. But it was pretty apparent that like the operation wasn't like a big scale operation. This was clearly just for like personal use, but they were really just like throwing it at the wall and seeing what stuck. Speaking of throwing things against the wall to see what stuck, well, actually this wouldn't really be that. This would be more like grasping at straws, okay? Grant's attorneys tried to have two very important pieces of evidence not admissible at trial. This was Sylvie and the money that Grant had stolen to speak to Sylvie. They were like, this is not important. You need to not put this in there. Basically what they said is that this, quote, qualified as inadmissible bad character evidence. They were like, basically this makes our guy look real bad. Can you please not put it in here? It's going to make people think badly of him right from the jump. They also wanted to omit the fact that Grant was fired from his nursing job and keep the like sex addiction, internet addiction thing out of the testimony as well. Like the jury didn't need to know any of that stuff. It doesn't apply. That context is not important, okay? No, that's not what I'm saying. That's what they were saying. This didn't happen though. Obviously all of this was admitted at trial, and Sylvie was definitely discussed at trial. They showed a lot of Sylvie. They ended up showing over 600 photos of Sylvie to the court in various stages of undress, okay? And like the Christmas cards, they showed everything. And while photos of Sylvie, you know, across the screen, Grant was completely transfixed by her. And it was apparent to those in the court. The prosecution said of Grant's obsession with Sylvie, and I quote, Grant fell in love with a woman named Sylvie. Not only did he fall in love with her, he became obsessed with her, to the point that she's all that mattered. This trial was very sad, as I'm sure you can imagine. Jason testified for the prosecution, so against Grant, and he was really emotional during his testimony. He broke down a few times. Grant was fine, unemotional. He was silent, stoic during all of the proceedings. He didn't really show much emotion at all, except for when the medical examiner like showed the photos of his family's bodies and explained their injuries. He did get emotional during that portion, but that was pretty much it. And he never testified on his own behalf, so he never really did explain himself. Not that he would, because he was claiming that he was innocent, but nobody ever got to hear anything from his lips about what happened. So the prosecution was trying to convince the jury to give Grant the death penalty. They said that these murders were cold, calculated, just really, like, he's a fucked up person to do what he had done. And the defense tried to convince them not to give him the death penalty, not to, you know what I mean? Like, he's not guilty, don't kill him. And they gave like a list of reasons as to why they thought Grant should not get the death penalty. His age, his lack of a prior criminal record, the fact that he was a Christian, which hardly matters. And the thing that really gets to me and really, really bothers me is them saying that he shouldn't get the death penalty because he was a really good brother and a best friend to Cody. I feel like if I roll my eyes any harder, they're going to shoot out of my face. Like, I'm going to detach them and they're going to shoot right on the screen and you're going to be like, whoa, that was a lot. And then that's going to be that. Like, it's so frustrating. That part makes me so mad. Like, so fucking mad. In order for Grant to get the death penalty, the jury would have to vote unanimously to make that be his fate. And in the end, they weren't able to do that. They weren't able to get everybody to agree that this is what should happen to him. So instead, Grant Amato was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And when the verdict was read, there was gasps in the courtroom. Family members hugged each other, friends hugged each other. It was just a really emotional moment, as I'm sure you can imagine. And the prosecutor said of the verdict, and I quote, "It's very difficult to get 12 people to agree to impose the death penalty. It's a very difficult decision to do." After the verdict, Grant's attorney was just basically like, we did the best we could with what we had. Their case was entirely circumstantial, but strong, and basically getting him out of the death penalty was the best we could do here. And he said specifically of this, and I quote, "Saving our client's life, that's the so-called prize in all of this. And finally, our heart goes out to Jason Amato. This has to be devastating for him." And this was devastating for him. This was devastating for the whole family. They all believed right from the beginning that it was Grant. And that's got to be a really hard thing to know. To like know immediately that someone you loved could do this. His brother, from day one, pleaded with him for answers. His aunt believed that he had killed them for money. Even his grandma believed that he had murdered his parents. His grandma said specifically of this, and I quote, "That kid did it. Grant killed them. Get rid of those people and I'll be free." And that's grandma. That's grandma talking. They knew, right? They clearly knew he did it, but they couldn't understand. They particularly couldn't understand how he could do this to Cody. Like, him and Cody were close. They were best friends. They did everything together. They wanted to like have the same life and just be like bros forever, right? And like they even said Cody would have spent every single dollar to his name to help Grant. And he murdered him. And he not only murdered him, but he tried to frame him for the murders of his parents. Like, it's just so fucked up. So as I said, Grant wasn't very emotional during the trial, but apparently the victim impact statements did get to him a little bit, particularly his brother Jason's. Jason was very emotional. Like, he lost his entire family. And he talked about how hard that had been. And he particularly said it was hard not talking to his mother. Because as I said, he talked to her every week. And at the time that he gave this victim impact statement, he said it had been 208 days since he had last talked to his mom. That note gets me a little bit. He just said that, like, it had been almost a year since he had heard her voice, you know, like half a year since he had heard her voice. And that's like, you know. And he said that even though they were gone, he wanted everybody to know that his parents and his brother were amazing people. And that he still loved his brother Grant in spite of himself. Grant has maintained his innocence ever since being convicted. And he did actually try to appeal his conviction in 2019 based on what his attorney calls, quote, several factors, including what they call speculative digital forensic evidence, which was, I think, about Cody's cell phone trying to be wiped after the murders. They didn't really believe that it could be proven that that's what was happening. And they had criticism over what was allowed and what could be argued during jury selection. And also they had a problem with a theory being able to be introduced on the murder weapon on it being Blake's, but there was no proof that it was. His team also argued that there was no physical evidence, which they already said, and that the police had tunnel vision. They believed that they had grounds for the appeal and that it would be successful and they would be able to try this case again. Now, these things can take time, right? Appeals can take a long time, and at the time I'm filming this, I don't see an update on that, but I'm curious, like, what do you think? Do you think he deserves a new trial? Like, I know emotionally we want to be like, no, fuck that guy. He definitely doesn't deserve a new trial. He killed his parents, right? But legally speaking, do you think he deserves a new trial? I just don't know. It's tough. I have such hard times, and I know a lot of people do, and it's just like a fully circumstantial case on how I feel, because circumstantial evidence is evidence, and it does matter, and it can paint a pretty compelling paint a compelling picture, right? And it did in this case, but I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I know how I feel emotionally. I don't know how I feel logically. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, as far as Sylvie goes, because I'm sure some of you are curious, like, what the fuck happened with Sylvie? Well, it appears from what I can see that she's still working. I was able to go online and I found her new, like, website, and it seems like she's still working as a CamGirl, and she's going under a new name of Addie Sweets, and I, like, went into her room, and that's how I was able to kind of figure out how, like, CamGirl things work. I was able to see her pictures and her menu and all that jazz, and it seems like she's still working. Like, I can't even imagine. Can you imagine how weird it is for her? Like, to know that she was connected to something like this, and to know everything he did, and he did it because he's, like, obsessed with her. Like, she has to know, right? I guess it's possible she doesn't know. I didn't see anything that confirmed one way or the other if police, like, spoke to her and if they told her what happened. I actually saw stuff that said they didn't, which seems crazy to me. I didn't see it confirmed one way or the other. But that's got to be like, she has to know, right? Yeah, she has to know. That's probably why she changed her name, right? To separate herself from the weird little man who literally killed for her. And with that said, that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Chad, Margaret, and Cody Amato at the hands of their own son and brother, Grant Amato. Isn't that just so crazy, dude? It's so, I'm often, even though I talk about this every week and I look into this stuff every single day, it still blows my mind sometimes what people do and why. It just seems so like stupid. Like, literally, Sylvie was just doing her job, giving the fantasy, and he fell in love. He definitely wears a shirt that says school. Like, okay, that's a John Mulaney joke. That might be too deep of a cut. I'm just trying to, like, lighten the mood because, like, that was just so much. Like, I really went down a rabbit hole with this. I really went deep. I saw the crime scene photos. It was just a lot. It's just so stupid. He killed his whole family for nothing. For what? For money? For a woman who only pretended to like you because you literally paid her to do so. Idiot. Gross, grubby Grant Amato. Like, ugh. And now, considering all the information I've given you on this case, I want you to answer the question of the day. Do you think Grant Amato killed his family due to rage for them outing him to Sylvie and effectively ending their relationship? Or do you think he killed them to gain monetarily from them to fuel this obsession? And additionally, I have another question because this is something I kind of touched on but didn't get into. Do you think he was trying to stage a murder-suicide? Because here's my thought. I kind of think that he wasn't. I wasn't there. I didn't look at the evidence. Just based on what I read, I almost think that he tried to make it look like Cody and Chad shot each other. Not that Cody shot them and then killed himself. Because why, if he was trying to stage it like Cody killed them both and then killed himself, would he even bother to put the holstering gun on his dad? Like, that part doesn't make sense to me at all. I just don't get it. So let me know what you think down below. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all of the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for remembering Chad, Margaret, and Cody with me today. They sounded like such a good family. They sounded like they really just like loved Grant. They did everything for him to try to protect him and love him. He literally robbed them blind for a woman that he didn't know. And they knew this, and they continued to love him and try to protect him from getting in trouble, getting arrested when he was stealing from all of these different people. And in response, he killed them all. And that's just so fucking sad. And that's what needs to be remembered more than Grant Amato, CamGirl, sex, obsession, like all of that, okay, whatever, but he killed these people and they're gone forever. And that's really sad. Please let me know down below of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. As you know, as this video illustrates, if you leave me the suggestion enough times, eventually I will get to it because like in sight, in mind, I've already said it. And I'd love to look into the cases that you're interested in because you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, you can follow me on all my social media. It's all listed below. I have a Facebook, I have an Instagram, I have Twitter, and I do have a TikTok. I'm trying to make TikTok a thing because, like, here's the thing with TikTok. I like to scroll on TikTok because I'm, like, old, so I don't like to make content for it, but I'm starting to do it because people can blow up on TikTok, and I'm just trying to get people to come here to hang out with us in the Brat Pack. So if they find me on TikTok, they can come over to YouTube. So tell your friends, tell your wife that I'm on TikTok as a 33-year-old, how old am I? 33-year-old lady. I'm pretty sure I'm 33. Once you get in your 30s, it really doesn't fucking count anymore. Anyways, I was gonna say that I was gonna link the makeup down below that I used today, but I didn't do my makeup today, so I'm not. But I will have like, these are from Ana Luisa. I'll have a link to my merch store. This isn't my merch. This is actually my friend Mike's merch. I'll link his website down below. It's actually his birthday today. Happy birthday, Mike. I'm gonna link you're not watching this. You might be watching this, I don't know. I'm gonna link this down below for you guys because this is a rad shirt and he just makes really sick clothes as well. I just want to say one more thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video, because without sponsors like this, I couldn't do this as full-time as I do now. And of course, I want to thank you guys for always being so supportive of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.